Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself be carried away by a story from the Middle Ages. Welcome to our channel. Tonight, we travel back in time. The road was no longer a path of dirt and stone, but a ribbon of fading slate winding through a world of sapphire and silver. As the sun dipped beneath the jagged teeth of the distant mountains, the twilight did not bring darkness, but rather a thick, undulating tide of blue mist. It curled around the trunks of ancient gnarled oaks like the breath of the earth itself, softening the edges of the world until the forest became a series of gentle, ghostly silhouettes. The weary messenger moved through this haze with a slow, rhythmic gait, the steady thud of leather boots against the damp earth providing a grounding cadence to the evening. There was no rush now. The day's long miles were etched into the muscles of the legs and the quiet ache of the shoulders, but the destination was finally in sight, a silhouette of solid, unmoving shadow against the swirling azure of the fog. This was the sanctuary, a way station built of heavy river stone and timber so old it had turned the color of iron. It sat perched upon a low rise, a silent guardian against the elements. As the messenger approached, the first stirrings of the winter storm began to whisper through the high branches of the pines. It was a lonely, hollow sound, the prelude to a blizzard that promised to bury the world in white. But here, at the edge of the blue mist, the wind felt distant, a mere suggestion of the power it would soon wield. The air was crisp, tasting of pine needles and the coming snow, chilling the skin just enough to make the thought of a hearth feel like a physical embrace. The heavy oak door of the sanctuary was a masterpiece of rustic strength, bound in wrought iron hinges that had weathered 100 years of mountain winters. When the messenger pressed a palm against the wood, it felt cool and rough, vibrating slightly with the low moan of the rising wind. With a slow, deliberate push, the door swung inward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a sanctuary of amber and gold. The transition was immediate and profound. The biting chill of the blue mist was replaced by a wall of dry, fragrant warmth. The scent of seasoned cedar and aged beeswax hung heavy in the air, a perfume of safety and stillness. Inside, the world was defined by the hearth. It was a massive cavern of stone that dominated the far wall, where a fire of thick oak logs roared with a steady, rhythmic vitality. The flames were not frantic. They were deep and orange, licking at the soot-stained chimney with a languid grace. The light they cast danced across the room, painting the stone walls in shades of honey and copper. The shadows in the corners were not dark or frightening, but soft and velvet-like, receding and advancing with the gentle pulse of the fire. The messenger stepped inside and closed the door, the heavy thud of the latch signaling the end of the journey. The howl of the blizzard was instantly muffled, reduced to a faint, musical whistle that only served to emphasize the profound silence of the room. Moving with the slow grace of someone whose body has finally found its resting place, the messenger unbuckled the heavy leather satchel. It was a sturdy bag, its surface worn smooth by years of travel, containing scrolls and letters that were now safe from the damp. It was placed carefully upon a heavy oak table, the wood of which bore the faint scars of 1,000 previous travelers. Every movement was a meditation. The removal of the heavy wool cloak damp, at the hem and smelling of the mist-revealed layers of soft linen and quilted tunic. The cloak was hung upon a peg near the fire, where it began to release a faint, earthy steam as the heat reclaimed it. The messenger sank into a chair carved from a single piece of dark walnut, cushioned with thick sheepskin that felt like a cloud against the weary frame. The texture was incredibly soft, a stark contrast to the rugged stone of the walls and the biting wind outside. From this vantage point, the sanctuary was a symphony of sensory peace. To the left, a tall, narrow window of leaded glass offered a glimpse back into the world that had been left behind. The blue mist was pressing against the panes now, illuminated from within by the orange glow of the fire. The two colors met at the cold, ethereal sapphire of the night, and the warm, vibrant amber of the hearth, creating a shimmering violet border that seemed to vibrate with a quiet energy. Outside, the blizzard had arrived in earnest. The wind roared across the roof tiles, a wild, elemental force that shook the very foundations of the mountain. Yet inside the sanctuary, not a single candle flame flickered. The walls, 4 feet thick and infused with the weight of centuries, stood defiant. The messenger watched a single snowflake land against the exterior of the glass, a perfect, crystalline star that lingered for a heartbeat before vanishing into the blue. There was a profound sense of gratitude in the observation or recognition of the thin line between the chaos of the storm and the absolute stillness of the room. The fire crackled, a sharp, pleasant sound that punctuated the low hum of the heat. A log shifted, sending a cascade of glowing embers upward like a constellation of tiny, temporary stars. The smell of the oak smoke was intoxicating, a primal scent that spoke of ancient nights and the enduring comfort of the flame. The messenger's eyes began to heavy, the lids drooping in time with the flickering shadows. The warmth had seeped through the layers of clothing, deep into the marrow of the bones, loosening the knots of tension that had been tied by the day's long trek. On a small side table sat a ceramic mug, its surface glazed in a deep forest green. It was filled with a simple infusion of dried herbs, chamomile, and wild mint that had been steeping in the heat of the hearth. The steam rose in a straight, silver ribbon, carrying a scent that was both sweet and cooling. The messenger took a slow sip, feeling the liquid warmth travel down the throat and spread through the chest. It was a quiet ritual, a final sealing of the peace that had been found within these stone walls. The room seemed to expand and contract with the breath of the fire. The heavy timber beams overhead, darkened by time and smoke, held the weight of the roof with an effortless strength. There was no sound here but the fire and the distant, muffled symphony of the storm. The messenger leaned back further into the sheepskin, the body feeling heavy and anchored, as if the stone of the sanctuary had lent its own permanence to the human form. The mind, once occupied with maps and miles and the delivery of words, now drifted like the mist outside. The thoughts were no longer sharp or directional. They were soft, rounded, and colored by the orange light of the hearth. The blue mist continued to swirl against the window, a silent, ghostly sea that had swallowed the road and the forest. But the road was a memory now, a distant thing belonging to another version of the self. Here, in the heart of the stone, there was only the present moment, the warmth of the fire, the scent of the herbs, and the rhythmic song of the wind against the chimney. The messenger closed their eyes, letting the orange glow permeate the back of the eyelids. The world was small, safe, and perfectly still. The storm could rage, the snow could pile high against the door, and the blue mist could claim the mountainside. But within the sanctuary, the fire would burn steady and true, a golden anchor in a sea of sapphire night. The silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace, a heavy, velvet blanket that settled over the room, promising a rest that was as deep and enduring as the stones themselves. The storm had followed you for miles, gathering strength across the moorland like a living thing of ice and fury. Your horse had long since turned back, spooked by the first crack of thunder over the distant peaks. Now you traveled on foot, each step a small victory against the wind that pressed against your cloak and tried to turn you from your path. The message pouch hung heavy at your side, its leather worn smooth by countless journeys across these northern territories. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deliver it to the abbey in the valley below. Tonight, survival meant finding shelter before the full weight of the blizzard descended from the mountains. Through the thickening veil of snow, a shape emerged from the whiteness. Stone, dark and ancient, rising from the hillside like a promise. The sanctuary was smaller than you remembered from your last passage through these lands, perhaps 3 summers past. A simple structure of weathered granite, built by monks in an age when travelers were fewer and the roads more perilous. The blue-gray stones seemed to absorb what little light remained in the storm-darkened sky, solid and immovable against the screaming wind. Your fingers, numb beneath their leather gloves, fumbled with the iron latch. The door swung inward with a groan that was immediately swallowed by the roar of the blizzard. You stepped across the threshold, and the wind tried one last time to follow you inside before you pressed your full weight against the heavy oak, sealing out the chaos of the storm. Silence fell like a blanket, broken only by your own ragged breathing and the muffled howl of wind beyond the walls. The sanctuary's interior was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through a single narrow window set high in the eastern wall. As your eyes adjusted, the space revealed itself. A single chamber, perhaps 20 paces across, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow. The air was cold but still, a blessed relief from the cutting wind outside. Someone had been here before you, perhaps days ago, perhaps weeks. A stack of firewood sat beside a stone hearth, carefully arranged and dry. Beside it, a small pile of kindling and a piece of flint wrapped in oiled cloth. The monks who maintained these shelters thought of everything, leaving gifts for travelers they would never meet. You shed your snow-crusted cloak and hung it on an iron peg driven into the stone wall. Your fingers were clumsy as you worked to build the fire, but the familiar task brought its own meditation. The kindling arranged just so, creating space for air to feed the flames. The flint struck once, twice, 3 times before a spark caught and held. You bent close, breathing gently on the tiny orange glow, coaxing it to life. The fire grew slowly, as all good things do. First, the kindling caught, sending up thin wisps of smoke that climbed toward the blackened chimney. Then the smaller pieces of wood began to char and crack, releasing the scent of old pine and oak. Finally, the larger logs embraced the flame, and warmth began to radiate outward into the cold stone chamber. As the fire established itself, you added another log and settled back to watch the transformation of the space. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, turning the gray stone to amber and gold. The light reached into corners that had been dark moments before, revealing simple furnishings. A wooden bench worn smooth by countless travelers, a shelf holding clay cups, and a sealed jar of what might be dried herbs or grain. A pallet of straw covered with rough wool blankets. Beyond the walls, the storm intensified. You could hear the wind, now not as a roar, but as a layered symphony of sounds. The high whistle as it cut across the chimney top. The deeper moan as it pressed against the eastern wall. The occasional rattle when a particularly strong gust tested the shuttered window. But these sounds only emphasize the sanctuary's protection, the blessed solidity of stone and mortar between you and the wild night. You removed your boots and set them near the fire to dry, wiggling your toes as feeling slowly returned. The message pouch you placed carefully on the bench, its contents safe and dry. The Abbey could wait. The letters and parcels you carried would arrive when they arrived, as they always had. For now, there was only this moment, this fire, this shelter from the storm. The clay jar on the shelf did indeed contain grain barley, by the smell of it, and you set a small amount to simmer in one of the cups placed at the edge of the hearth. The fire's heat was gentle and indirect there, perfect for coaxing the grain to softness. While it cooked, you wrapped yourself in one of the wool blankets and sat on the bench, watching the flames paint their ever-changing patterns on the stone. The fire had its own language, you thought. The soft crackle when sap pockets burst. The gentle hiss when moisture escaped from the wood. The deep, almost breathing sound of the larger logs settling into their bed of coals. Orange light pulsed and swayed, creating the illusion of movement in the still air. Shadows stretched and contracted on the walls like living things, dancing to music only they could hear. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but it seemed distant now, a story being told in another room. The blue fog of snow pressed against the window, creating a strange twilight that mixed with the warm firelight. The sanctuary existed in its own world, suspended between the cold white fury beyond and the orange warmth within. Your barley had softened, absorbing the water and releasing its subtle, earthy sweetness. You ate slowly, savoring the simple warmth of it, the way it seemed to spread comfort from your center outward. When the cup was empty, You set it aside and lay back on the pallet, pulling the blankets close. The fire had burned down to a steady bed of coals now, requiring no attention, content to glow its deep red-orange through the night. The heat it provided was gentle, just enough to take the edge from the stone chamber's chill. You watched the play of light on the ceiling, the way the shadows moved in their slow, hypnotic patterns. The storm would blow itself out by morning. The sky would clear to that crystalline blue that follows winter tempests. You would find your horse or continue on foot, would deliver your messages, would receive new ones and begin the journey home. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight there was only this: the ancient stones holding back the wind, the fire's patient glow, the soft wool against your skin, and the deep, peaceful knowing that you were exactly where you needed to be. The scent of wood smoke wove with the faint, sweet aroma of dried lavender from a sachet tucked into the mattress. Outside, the last of the winter's snow slid from the roof with a soft whump, a gentle reminder of the world settling. The great hearthstone radiated a warmth that seeped into the very floorboards, and the silence was not empty, but full of velvet cloak of quiet contentment. You breathed in and out, letting the stillness of centuries anchor you into sleep. In the heart of a vast, ancient forest, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches heavy with the weight of centuries, a solitary figure trudged wearily along a narrow path. The weary messenger, cloaked in a mantle of deep forest green, moved with a slow, deliberate pace, each step a testament to his exhaustion. His breath misted in the frigid air, a fleeting specter that dissolved into the swirling blue fog that clung to the ground like a gentle, insistent spirit. The wind whispered through the leaves, a soft, mournful lullaby that swayed the branches in a slow, rhythmic dance. The sound was a comforting presence, a familiar friend that accompanied the messenger on his journey, guiding him through the labyrinthine paths of the forest. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled his nostrils, a rich, earthy perfume that spoke of the cycle of life and the inevitability of rest. As the light of day began to fade, the messenger's eyes were drawn to a warm, flickering glow that seemed to dance in the distance. It was a beacon, a promise of sanctuary in the heart of the wilderness. Guided by the gentle light, he followed the path as it wound its way up a steep, rocky hill. The wind picked up, howling through the trees like a chorus of unseen voices, as if the forest itself was urging him onwards. At the top of the hill, nestled among the ancient oaks, stood a remote stone sanctuary. The building was old, its weathered stones worn smooth by time and the elements. The heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, was slightly ajar, inviting the weary traveler to enter. As the messenger stepped inside, he was enveloped by a sense of peace and tranquility that seemed to seep into his very soul. The interior of the sanctuary was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a roaring fire that crackled merrily in the hearth. The flames cast a warm, orange glow that danced across the stone walls, creating a mesmerizing play of light and shadow. The air was filled with the scent of burning wood, a comforting, familiar aroma that reminded the messenger of simpler times, of hearth and home. He made his way to a heavy, wooden table that stood in the center of the room. The surface was smooth, worn by the passage of countless hands over the years. Upon it, he laid his burden, a rolled parchment tied with a ribbon of deep blue. The task was complete, the message delivered, and for the moment he was at peace. The messenger turned his attention to the fire, drawn to its hypnotic dance like a moth to a flame. He knelt before the hearth, the heat washing over him in a soothing wave, chasing away the chill that had settled into his bones. The crackling of the fire was a gentle, rhythmic sound, a lullaby that lulled him into a state of calm, contemplative repose. As he watched the flames, he noticed a pail of water and a cloth folded neatly beside it. He dipped the cloth into the water, the liquid cool and refreshing against his skin. He wiped his face, the coolness a welcome respite from the chill of the journey. He then poured himself a cup of water from a clay jug that stood nearby. The water was cool and clear, a refreshing balm that soothed his parched throat. With a deep, contented sigh, the messenger settled himself on a bench that stood against the wall. The wood was smooth beneath his hands, worn by the passage of time and the touch of countless others who had sought sanctuary within these hallowed walls. He leaned back, his eyes heavy with the weight of his journey, the warmth of the fire a comforting presence that seemed to wrap around him like a gentle, protective embrace. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of unseen voices. But within the sanctuary, the messenger was safe, protected from the elements by the ancient stones that had stood the test of time. The sound of the storm was a distant, muffled roar, a reminder of the world outside, but one that held no power within these walls. The firelight flickered across the stone walls, casting a warm, orange glow that danced and played like a living thing. The messenger watched, his eyes growing heavy as the flames cast their hypnotic spell. The storm outside faded into the background, a distant, indistinct murmur that was no match for the soothing, rhythmic crackle of the fire. His thoughts drifted, carried away by the warmth and the mesmerizing dance of the flames. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, of the winding paths and the ancient trees that had guided him through the forest. He thought of the message he had carried, of the words that had been entrusted to him, and the peace that had come with the completion of his task. As his eyelids grew heavier, the messenger's thoughts turned to the sanctuary itself, to the ancient stones that stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time. He wondered about the hands that had carved these stones, about the lives that had been lived within these walls. He wondered about the stories that these stones could tell, about the secrets that they held within their weathered, time-worn surface. But these thoughts were fleeting, carried away by the warmth of the fire and the soothing, rhythmic crackle of the flames. The storm outside faded into the background, a distant, indistinct murmur that held no power within the sanctuary. The messenger's eyes grew heavier, his breath slowed, and he sank deeper into the comforting embrace of the firelight. As he drifted off to sleep, the messenger was enveloped by a sense of peace and tranquility that seemed to seep into his very soul. The firelight danced across the stone walls, casting a warm, orange glow that seemed to wrap around him like a gentle, protective embrace. And as the storm raged on outside, the messenger slept, lulled into a deep, dreamless slumber by the soothing, rhythmic crackle of the fire and the ancient, comforting presence of the sanctuary. High above, the vaulted ceiling held the shadows of centuries, cradling the silence of the night. The scent of dried lavender and beeswax hung faintly in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of stone walls that had stood through countless seasons. A draft whispered through the narrow windows, carrying with it the clean fragrance of rain-washed meadows beyond the monastery walls. The wooden beams overhead creaked ever so gently, settling into their nightly rest like old friends finding comfortable positions. Somewhere in the distant corridors, the soft pad of felt slippers marked a brother's quiet passage to Compline prayers. The fires glow-painted amber patterns across the worn flagstones, each flicker a gentle dance of light and shadow. A woolen blanket, woven by patient hands in the scriptorium during winter months, lay folded nearby, its weight a promise of warmth should the night grow cold. In this sacred stillness, time itself seemed to slow, each breath deepening into tranquil surrender. The fourth night found the weary messenger in a place of ancient stone and deep silence. His journey had become a slow crawl through a world of white, a desperate search for the next landmark, the next refuge. The sky had turned to a thick woolen gray, and then, as dusk bled into the early dark, the blizzard began in earnest. It was not a storm of rain or sleet, but of pure, swirling snow, a billion frozen feathers hurled by a wind that moaned across the fells and screamed through the pines. Just as the cold began to seep past the last defenses of his cloak, he saw it, a darker shape against the endless white, a squat tower of rough-hewn granite perched upon a low rise. It was a watch sanctuary, one of the old ones built by forgotten kings along the high passes. Its purpose was singular, to offer shelter, to preserve life against the mountain-s indifference. He bowed his head against the gale and pushed towards it. The heavy oak door, banded with iron, groaned on its hinges as he shouldered it open, and then shut out the screaming world with a solid, final thud. The silence inside was immense, a tangible presence that pressed against his ears after the wind's fury. For a long moment, he simply stood in the vestibule, a small, square space of cold stone, listening to the roar muffled to a deep, constant sigh. He was safe. The air within was still and frigid, smelling of dust and dry moss. A narrow archway led into the sanctuary's main chamber. Here, a circular room rose to a shadowed, vaulted ceiling. Slit windows, too narrow for anything but light and weather, were now white with driven snow. In the center of the room was a fire pit, a circle of soot-blackened stones, and beside it, a neat stack of seasoned wood and a small barrel of kindling left by some previous traveler, or perhaps a monk from the distant valley monastery. This was the covenant of the road, You took shelter, and you left fuel for the next soul. His movements were slow, ritualistic. He shrugged off his snow-crusted pack and heavy outer cloak, hanging them on a wooden peg that emerged from the wall like a petrified branch. His stiff fingers worked to gather tinder, to strike a spark from his flint. A tiny flame caught, hesitant and orange, and he nurtured it with his breath, a soft, steady stream of warmth onto the dry moss and twigs. He added small sticks, then a log. The fire woke, stretching its light up the sooty stones of the pit. Light transformed the sanctuary. The blue-gray gloom of the storm-filtered twilight retreated to the high corners, and a sphere of warm, orange radiance grew from the hearth. It painted the rough texture of the granite walls, making each crystal and imperfection a tiny, glittering landscape. The firelight danced on the curved ceiling, and the shadows of the window slits stretched and bowed like silent monks at prayer. He settled on the stone floor, which was worn smooth by generations of wayfarers, and laid out his bedroll. The heat reached him now, a gentle pressure on his face and hands. He could feel the ice in his beard begin to melt. From his pack, he took a small, dented tin and set it near the coals to warm a little water for a brew of pine needles and honey. The simple, familiar act was a meditation. Outside, the blizzard continued its endless song. The wind was a deep bass drum, a fundamental note of the world's inhale and exhale. It whistled precisely at the narrow windows, a high, fluting counter-melody. Sometimes a great gust would press against the tower itself, and the stone would seem to hum in sympathy, a vibration felt through the floor rather than heard. It was not a noise to fear, but a lullaby of immense power, a reminder of the wild world from which this circle of stone and fire provided a perfect, peaceful separation. Inside, the symphony was softer. The fire was its own orchestra, the low, contented roar of flame, the delicate crackle of resin escaping a pine log, the rhythmic pop of a bursting ember that sent a spiral of golden sparks up into the dark. The scent was heavenly wood smoke, of course, but also the smell of wet wool drying, of warm stone, of the simple herbal steam from his tin cup. He ate a little, hard cheese, drier bread softened by the steam. Each sense was soothed. His eyes rested on the fire, watching the endless, never-repeating dance of the flames blue at the heart, gold at the tips, a liquid tapestry of light. His skin drank in the warmth, the stiffness easing from his shoulders. The taste of the pine tea was clean and sharp, like the forest itself distilled. The soundscape wrapped around him, the deep wind and the gentle fire merging into a single, soothing resonance. He lay back on his bedroll, his head propped against his pack, and watched the ceiling. The storm-s rhythm was constant, a vast, breathing entity. He thought not of destinations or duties, but of the simplicity of this moment. The stone around him had stood for centuries, feeling the press of 1,000 such storms, sheltering 1,000 such weary souls. He was a link in a long, quiet chain. There was a profound comfort in that anonymity, in being just another traveler in the long night, granted the grace of warmth and safety. His breathing slowed to match the pace of the flickering light. The Blizzard-S song became the only thing, a blanket of sound that smothered all thought. The fire burned lower, settling into a bed of pulsating coals that glowed like a miniature sunset. In the sanctuary of stone, guarded by wind and snow, the weary messenger felt the gentle, irresistible pull of a deep and dreamless sleep, his watch over for the night, given over to the older, greater watchfulness of the mountains and the ancient, sheltering stones. His breath, once a labored dance with the thin, cold air, now slowed and steadied, merging with the rhythmic whispers of the night. The scent of pine and earth, carried on the gentle breeze, wafted through the small openings in the stone shelter, mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of wild thyme that grew in the crevices of the ancient rocks. The sound of the wind, once a howling chorus, now softened to a lullaby, humming a tune as old as the mountains themselves. The snow, once in relentless assault, now gently caressed the stones, adding another layer to the silent, white tapestry that draped the landscape. The weary messenger, wrapped in his tattered cloak, felt the cold seep away, replaced by a comforting warmth that seemed to rise from the very heart of the earth. As his eyelids grew heavy, he could have sworn he heard the distant, melodic call of a nightingale, a sweet, hopeful promise of the spring to come, echoing through the silent, snow-laden trees. And so, cradled by the gentle embrace of the mountains, the weary messenger slipped into the deep, dreamless sleep he so desperately needed, his soul at peace, his vigil temporarily lifted by the eternal, watchful guardians of the night. Snow lay like a soft secret along the path when the messenger reached the little stone sanctuary. The air moved in slow, steady breaths, a blizzard singing beyond the ledges and pines, and for a moment the world seemed to be exhaling into a pale blue fog. The sanctuary's silhouette rose, simple and sure, its roof heavy with white and its walls cut from weathered stone. Through narrow slits of window glass, the wind painted the fog in cinematic swirls, a hushed, cobalt haze that made the night feel like a long, gentle ocean. Inside, warmth gathered. A single hearth held a living, glowing heart of fire that roared with a comfortable, steady voice. Flames licked orange and honey against blackened iron, and the room filled with the slow exhale of heat. Shadows moved like quiet companions across carved beams and tapestries, and the orange light braided with the cool blue that seeped around the door frame, creating a calm, living picture of color. The storm-esque cool breath and the sanctuary-esque gentle reply. The messenger stood for a long time in the doorway, feeling the difference between the storm and the shelter. Snow that clung to the brim of his cloak melted in small, bright diamonds along the way, each bead of cold turning instantly to steam. His boots left soft prints in the rush mat before the hearth. The sound of the wind, distant and musical, threaded through the stones, a lullaby of flurries and branches brushing one another. It was a sound that did not hurry, but lingered like distant fingers over harp strings, steady and patient. He moved slowly, as if not to disturb the calm. The leather of his satchel sighed when he set it a well-used sound that fit into the room like a familiar phrase. He unfastened his cloak with hands steady from a long day and hung it upon a wooden peg. The coarse wool, still damp, gave up a faint scent that mingled with the hot smoke. Peat, a trace of river mud, and the faint, fragrant tang of pine needles carried in his hair. The cloak left a pale, wet halo on the stone where it rested, and the messenger watched the steam drift upward as though the sanctuary itself was breathing him in and letting him warm. The floor was uneven with years of use, cool beneath the soles until the fire-s reach gently softened its edge. He sat upon a low stool and drew his boots from tired feet. The leather slackened at the heel, and the inner wool lining gave a small, satisfied whisper. The simple ritual of slackening straps and loosening laces became a meditation, each movement slow and full, a careful noting of how the muscles unwound. A small trickle of water ran somewhere inside the wall, a steady, patient sound like a stream under ice. The messenger let his shoulders fall, and the room replied by cradling him in warmth. A pallet lay to one side, a narrow bed of packed straw beneath a woolen covering and a folded fur. The straw cradled, not crisp but mellow with years of use, giving a soft, slightly hushed creak as he eased himself down. The fur was thick and cool at first, and then softened warmly against his cheek. He felt the welcome of being enveloped, the shelter as slow assurance that he need move no farther. The air tasted of embers and dried herbs. Herbs hung in a small bundle above the hearth, diffused faint, herbal note, lavender and rosemary, calm and clean, and the smell mingled with the peat smoke in a way that felt like being wrapped in memory. Embers shifted in the hearth with gentle, contented pops. They shone like small suns, and the light painted every surface into softer versions of itself. The carved stone altar looked less rigid, the wooden beams more kindly, the tapestries less detailed and more like blankets of time. The messenger watched the coals for a long moment, counting the slow, small changes, the way a bright ember sank into a deeper, more patient glow. Fire is slow company. In its rhythm, there is a lesson. He inhaled that warmth and let it spread through his chest, slow and even, and felt how the storm-esque breath outside made his inner breathing gentler, more deliberate. Outside, the wind moved around the sanctuary in soft, blue eddies. Snow brushed the windows in a powdery hush. Where the fog was thinnest, a pale blue gleam made the glass look like frozen water. The storm's sound was near and distant at once, a vast, rolling whisper that never intruded but wholly filled the space beyond the walls. It was as if the world were singing the same lullaby from many voices, and the stone sanctuary kept time, steady and unhurried, like a metronome that allowed sleep to arrive without asking anything. The messenger let his hands rest on his lap and felt the fine map of his journey in small aches and pleasant reminders. A callous heat, a warm memory. His fingers brushed the satchel strap, its leather smoothed by many hands and seasons. He traced the embossed mark on the flap, a symbol of passage, a quiet history of places moved through, detailed and plain all at once. In the soft light, His own face seemed older and younger in different lines, a paradox that made him smile inwardly. He had carried many things for many miles, but here, in the hush of stone and flame, none of those obligations pressed him. The sanctuary did not demand anything but rest. A candle guttered by the altar, its flame a thin, steady thread. Wax pooled in a small, pearled pool, and the scent of tallow was warm and simple. The room had other small sounds, the slow, measured tick of a wooden clock that had kept time for decades, the whisper of a tapestry that shifted as the hearth warmed the air, loosening the fibers, a mouse-esque quiet step beyond the larder, as small a presence as a single heartbeat. Every sound sat low and even, like a chorus of soft instruments tuned for evening. The messenger let his mind move slowly over the day, and then lay it down. Images came and went frost-laced hedgerows, a village lamp swinging in the rain, the rough kindness of a common inlet they did so like birds passing near a window, not alighting to distract. The sanctuary, as steady warmth, shaped his thoughts into ease. He counted neither sheep nor miles, but rather considered the feel of his cloak as him, the weight of his boots, the steady glow of the coals. He drew in a breath, and the breath unrolled like a ribbon of smoke, and then let it fall away in a soft, even stream. As hours passed, the fire-s voice softened. The roaring edge gave way to a quieter murmur, but never truly stilled. Embers held memory, and those sparks kept the room in a dim, amber patience. Outside, the blue fog continued its slow sweep, touching and releasing the stones. The moon, veiled by cloud, cast silver lines that slipped through the narrow panes and pooled like a second, gentler light upon the floor. The messenger felt sleep, gentle and inevitable. His lids became heavy not with weariness alone, but with a sense of belonging to the moment. The sanctuary was a vessel that caught the storm and turned it into song. It wrapped him and the night together in the same cloth. The scent of peat, smoke, and rolled herbs lingered in the corners of his mouth like a soft memory. His heartbeat matched the small cadence of the clock beneath the altar. Each slow tick calmed him more. A measure, a measure, a measure, until there was nothing left but the easy procession of breath. In that space between waking and sleep, the messenger felt an unspoken promise. The stone walls, the shred of blue fog, the orange glow of the hearth, and the slow music of wind and fire conspired to say, without words, that morning would come gentle and clear. The storm would mark the night with its passage, painting the outside white and still, and dawn would arrive like a small, soft vow. The sanctuary kept time and kept him. It kept the world from moving too quickly. His last thought, as the lids closed, was of the hearth-s warmth spreading through his limbs, of the fur soft against his cheek, of the wind-s lullaby, and the steady, patient glow of embers. He let that warmth fill him. Breath widened and slowed. The stones seemed to breathe around him, a slow, stony exhale that held him safe. Outside, the blizzard murmured. Inside, the fire. Sleep came like a tide, slow and full, and the distant dawn made a